So I had a gang called the Black Warriors. That was our gang.
From Mitch Green, who started a gang called the Black Warriors before he became a renowned boxer, to Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., who was a high-ranking henchman in the Sinaloa cartel before becoming a pro boxer, these weren't just rough kids from tough neighborhoods. These were leaders who gave orders that ended lives, and then, almost impossibly, climbed into a boxing ring and became legends. Sonny Liston. There are fighters who are feared, and then there is Liston, a man so terrifying that the mere announcement of his name on a fight card sent other champions into quiet, desperate retirement. When Liston entered a room, grown men who had survived wars and gang wars and prison forgot how to breathe. He was, by nearly every account, the most physically intimidating heavyweight champion who ever lived. But long before he was a champion, long before the cameras caught his sullen, stone-cold stare glaring across a ring at the world, Sonny Liston was something far more dangerous. He was a man who belonged body and soul to the American underworld. Born Charles L. Liston around 1930 in Arkansas, the 24th of 25 children, Liston grew up knowing nothing but poverty, violence, and the absence of any real future. His father beat him. The land gave them nothing. And so, like thousands of young black men in mid-century America with no options and no exits, Liston ran. All the way to St. Louis, where the streets swallowed him whole. By his teenage years, he was leading a gang of street-level thugs operating across St. Louis's roughest corridors, pulling muggings, robberies, and running enough low-level chaos that local police began calling him the Yellow Shirt Bandit. A 1950 armed robbery conviction sent him to Missouri State Penitentiary, and it was there, inside those walls, that he first discovered boxing. It would change his life, but not, as the movies might suggest, by simply redirecting him away from crime. Instead, it delivered him into the hands of something far worse than any street gang. When Liston walked out of that prison in 1952, he walked directly into the orbit of the American Mafia. By 1958, the contracts on Sonny Liston's career were majority owned by two of the most notoriously dangerous boxing operatives in organized crime history: Frankie Carbo, a Lucchese family associate known in backrooms as Mr. Gray, and Blinky Palermo, a Philadelphia crime syndicate operative whose fingerprints were on nearly every rigged fight in the country. Liston served them not just as a boxer, but as a high-ranking enforcer, a leg breaker, a debt collector, a walking symbol of what happened when you owed the wrong people money. His physique, 6'1", 215 pounds with an 84-inch reach, made him the perfect instrument of intimidation. The Mafia didn't just promote Sonny Liston, they owned him.
And so, okay, the mob killed him. I figured the mob killed him. So the question is, why?
That question, why, haunted boxing historians for decades, because Liston's relationship with the mob extended beyond just fighting under their contracts. He fought 12 bouts under Carbo and Palermo's influence, and the 1960 Senate probe into underworld boxing control forced Liston himself to testify, doing so, by all accounts, in a state of near illiteracy, barely able to articulate the arrangements that had defined his entire professional life. The investigation was a public humiliation and a rare moment where the curtain was pulled back on just how completely organized crime had colonized the sport of boxing. Then came his two mysterious losses to Muhammad Ali in 1964 and 1965, fights that have never fully been explained. The first ended in a surprise 7th-round stoppage. The second, even more baffling, ended with a knockout so fast and so soft that ringside observers didn't even see the punch land clearly. The word "fixed" was whispered in every boxing gym from New York to Las Vegas. Theories swirled about mob threats against his family, unpaid debts, and orders from above that made losing more survivable than winning.
Well, there are a lot of people in New Jersey who will tell you for a fact that Sonny Liston was killed in retribution.
And then came death. In January of 1971, Liston was found dead in his Las Vegas home, officially ruled a heroin overdose. Except Liston, by most accounts from those who knew him, was terrified of needles. The overdose explanation satisfied no one who had spent any time around the man. The alternative explanation, the one whispered in gyms and spoken plainly by boxing insiders for 50 years since, was that the mob had finally collected on a debt Sonny could never repay. Mitch "Blood" Green. New York City in the 1970s was a war zone. That is not a metaphor. In the South Bronx alone, entire city blocks were burning, sometimes deliberately, sometimes from neglect, sometimes because poverty and desperation and the total abandonment of a community by its government had reduced entire neighborhoods to ash and rubble. Into this world, Mitch Green was born, raised, and forged, and by the time the Levy riot, NYPD gave him a title, King of New York Street Gangs. He had earned it in a currency paid entirely in blood, bullets, and survival against odds that should have killed him multiple times over. Born on January 13, 1957, in Augusta, Georgia, and relocated to the Bronx as a child, Mitch didn't just fall into street life. He rose through it with a ferocity that made him legendary before he ever threw a professional punch. He started with a crew he called the Black Warriors before graduating to the Black Spades, the dominant gang force in 1970s New York.
And that's how I got affiliated with the gang, jails, boxing, this is a style of boxing that we call it street fighting.
The progression he describes is almost casual: jail, fighting, boxing, gangs, as though one naturally led to the next, as though in the Bronx of the 1970s there was no other conceivable sequence of events for a young man with nowhere to go and no one telling him there was something better waiting.
So I had a gang called the Black Warriors. That was our gang.
By his own account, he was one of the most feared figures on those streets. His nickname, Blood, wasn't given to him. It was earned, fight by fight, confrontation by confrontation, in a city that only respected one currency.
Street fighting. Every time I fight, I'll make somebody bleed. So a lot of times I wouldn't quit fighting until I made bad scratches.
He survived multiple shootings, one of them so improbable that it reads almost like legend. A bullet ricocheted off his skull. He walked himself to the hospital.
Throwing bullets to the ground. It hit the hard part of my skull and ricocheted off.
What boxing eventually gave him was legitimacy. He won 4 New York Golden Gloves titles, 1976, 1977, 1979, and 1980, and turned professional in 1980 with a record that included a 1986 fight against a young Mike Tyson. Tyson won by unanimous decision, but the story between those two men didn't end in the ring. It ended, or perhaps continued, in the streets of Harlem at 4 in the morning, outside a boutique called Dapper Dan's.
I was driving down the street, and people told me, "Yo, Mike's down the block." I said, "Yeah, he's down there in front of Dapper Dan."
What happened that night in 1988 became the stuff of New York City mythology. Green, alone, confronted Tyson in the street and called him out, claiming to this day that Tyson never actually beat him. Tyson would later claim Green was on PCP. Green denies it completely.
If I was hollering, if it hit me, I'd be stressed out.
What is not disputed is that Tyson fractured his hand on Mitch Green's face that night, a man who had absorbed a bullet to the head without going down, a man who once walked away from being shot in the leg without anyone even noticing. In 2025, Mitch Green was inducted into the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame. Adonis Stevenson. There are redemption stories in boxing. And then there is the story of Adonis Stevenson, a story so extreme, so violent in its lows and so breathtaking in its heights, that it almost defies the standard architecture of a redemption arc entirely. Because before Adonis Stevenson was Superman, before he was the WBC light heavyweight champion of the world, before he defended that title 9 consecutive times against some of the most dangerous fighters on the planet, he was the undisputed leader of one of Montreal's most feared criminal enterprises, running women, running violence, running a gang called Le Gang de l'Ouest, with a ruthlessness that sent multiple people to hospitals and eventually sent him to prison. In the late 1990s, Stevenson rose to lead Le Gang de l'Ouest, the West Gang, a Haitian street gang operating in Montreal's West End, whose criminal portfolio included extortion, assaults, and most damning of all, an organized prostitution network in which women were coerced and beaten into adult intimate work, with Stevenson directly profiting from their exploitation. Court records are not ambiguous. One victim testified to being beaten and forced into the business. Another described Stevenson not as a reluctant participant, but as the man in charge who used violence as a management tool. In 1998, at just 21 years old, he was convicted of managing adult intimate workers, assault, and threats. The sentence was 4 years. He served approximately 18 months before parole in 2000. The years inside changed him, or perhaps more accurately, they gave him something to change into. He found boxing in prison, trained with an almost fanatical intensity, and turned professional in 2006 at the age of 29. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. His southpaw power was so ferocious, so completely overwhelming to to any opponent unfortunate enough to be standing across from it that it earned him not just a nickname, but a mythology. In 2013, Adonis Stevenson knocked out the previously dominant Chad Dawson in the first round to claim the WBC light heavyweight championship, sending shockwaves through the division and making him a legitimate national hero in Canada. But the past never disappeared. Journalists went back to the court records. Former victims gave interviews. During fight week ahead of his 2013 bout against Tony Bellew, articles surfaced that reintroduced the world to a version of Adonis Stevenson that he had worked hard to leave behind. Adonis the pimp, the gang leader, the man convicted of crimes that had devastated real human lives. Stevenson expressed frustration with the coverage, but never denied the convictions. He was a man living with the full weight of what he had done. Mike Tyson. There is a version of Mike Tyson's story that the world knows very well. The boy from Brownsville who became the youngest heavyweight champion in history at 20 years old. The wrecking ball who dismantled every opponent in front of him in the first round or the second. The man whose very name made arenas sell out on pure spectacle alone. That story is real, but there is another story, one that Tyson himself has told, repeatedly and without apology, about who he was before Cus D'Amato found him, before the boxing gyms, before the discipline, when he was just a kid in Brownsville, Brooklyn, running with wolves. By age 10, he had joined small street crews, loose Brooklyn outfits running muggings, robberies, and petty theft as a matter of basic survival. He is described in multiple autobiographies and interviews, leading these groups by virtue of his already formidable physical strength, capable of bench pressing 200 pounds at 13 years old. He was arrested 38 times before the age of 13. 38 times. Each arrest was, in its own way, a countdown to either a very long prison sentence or a very early death. What interrupted that countdown was a boxing counselor named Bobby Stewart at the Tryon School for Boys, who saw something in the angry, explosive teenager and connected him to legendary trainer Cus D'Amato. What followed was one of boxing history's most famous transformations. The boy who had once terrorized Brownsville became the man who terrorized heavyweight divisions. When D'Amato died in 1985, having legally adopted Tyson as his own son, Tyson channeled that grief and everything that had come before into an absolute hurricane of violence inside the ropes. The street associations didn't vanish entirely. His later entanglement with promoter Don King, a figure with his own well-documented connections to underworld figures, shaped the business of his career in ways that many argue robbed him financially. His association with Tupac Shakur's entourage placed him on the night of September 7, 1996, at a fight in Las Vegas, just hours before Tupac was shot and killed. These weren't casual brushes with the underworld. They were the gravitational pull of a world that, once it has you, does not easily release its grip. He served 3 years in prison for a 1992 rape conviction. He returned to boxing. He bit Evander Holyfield's ear in one of the most surreal moments in sports history. He lost to Lennox Lewis. He ran out of money. And now, at 59, he is at peace, podcasting, acting, and reflecting on the kid from Brownsville with a clarity that comes only from having survived something most people wouldn't have. Ricardo Mayorga. Ricardo Mayorga is, without question, one of the most genuinely unclassifiable human beings in the history of professional boxing. He smoked cigarettes during training camp. He drank beer between rounds. He trash-talked opponents in language so viciously personal that it frequently had to be edited for broadcast. He fought like a man who had never received a single technical instruction and didn't need any, throwing wild, looping bombs from positions that textbooks would classify as wrong and that opponents found genuinely terrifying. He was, in the truest possible sense, a man the sport of boxing could not contain. And before the sport even found him, the streets of Nicaragua had already turned him into something that the sport's most refined champions genuinely did not know how to handle.
Cuando era vago, cuando era jefe de pandilla y me agarraba con puñales. Y esto es con hecho, no es mentira.
By his early teens, Mayorga had joined and eventually risen to lead a street gang in Nicaragua's poorest neighborhoods, a brutal crew operating in an environment rife with turf violence and survival crime. He would later say that a gun jammed on him twice during this period of his life. Twice, a gun that should have killed him failed to fire. He treated this apparently as unremarkable. What boxing gave Mayorga was not a transformation so much as a redirection. He turned pro in 1993 after attending military school in Managua, but the streets never left his personality. They were his personality, refracted through the lens of professional competition into something that audiences found simultaneously appalling and irresistible. His 2002 and 2003 wins over Vernon Forrest, a man who was 35-0 and considered untouchable, shocked the boxing world and made Mayorga a unified welterweight champion. His subsequent fights against Shane Mosley, Oscar De La Hoya, and others were less about who won or lost and more about the sheer volcanic spectacle of watching a man who absolutely refused to acknowledge the basic rules of professional competition operate at the highest levels of the sport. Hector Camacho. Spanish Harlem in the 1970s was a neighborhood that consumed people. It consumed them, young, fast, and without ceremony. The drugs came in, the jobs went out, and in the space between poverty and desperation, street gangs became the only institution that offered young men both belonging and protection. Into this world, in a building on 114th Street, Hector Luis Camacho grew up, a Puerto Rican boy with fast hands, faster feet, and a personality so luminously electric that it would one day make him the most entertaining fighter of his generation. But first, it made him a gang member. And before boxing gave him a way out, the streets gave him Rikers Island. Camacho joined the Young Samurais gang as a teenager, engaging in car thefts, fights, and the kind of petty crime that, in a neighborhood like Spanish Harlem in the 1970s, was less a choice than a curriculum. At 16, he stole a car and was sent to Rikers Island. It was there, inside one of New York City's most notorious correctional facilities, that he began to seriously develop the boxing skills he had been practicing since age 12. He came out of that institution and built something extraordinary. 3 Golden Gloves titles between 1978 and 1980, a professional debut in 1980, and then a run through the sport, claiming world titles in the super featherweight, lightweight, and junior welterweight divisions that made him not just a champion, but a phenomenon. The macho time persona, flamboyant costumes, foot-blurring movement, a charisma so outsized it barely fit inside any arena, made him Spanish Harlem's undisputed prince and one of the sport's greatest entertainers.
Camacho's are crazy, bro. I was surprised. I think the 11th round, I hit him with a right hand. He was going back and he boom. Boom. I was surprised because he had a good chin, you know? I don't think people respect him that much. He's got power, good technique.
Even other champions found him impossible to fully contain, physically or personally. But the streets of Spanish Harlem never fully released him. Multiple cocaine arrests, domestic abuse charges, a 2001 bust in an East Harlem bar, a burglary conviction, and eventually, in 2012, the final brutal confirmation of what it meant to never truly leave the world you came from. Camacho was shot in the head in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, alongside a friend in what investigators would later connect to local drug trafficking networks. He died 4 days later. Zab Judah. Brownsville. Brooklyn is not a neighborhood that lets its children go easily. It marks them. It shapes them in ways that survive every championship belt, every television appearance, every round of applause in every arena they ever fight in. Zab Judah knows this better than almost anyone. He grew up in Brownsville when it was perhaps at its most dangerous, a community ground down by the crack epidemic, carved up by gang territories where the Crips and the Bloods were not just present, but dominant, where a young man navigating those streets either chose a side or became a target. And Zab Judah, from one of boxing's most extraordinary fighting families, navigated all of it and came out the other side, a 5-time world champion. Born October 27, 1977, into a family where boxing was less a sport and more a religion, his father Yoel Judah was a 6-time kickboxing champion and trainer. Zab was technically the youngest of 11 brothers in a devout Jewish household. But devotion and geography exist in tension in Brownsville. The streets were outside the door, and the streets had their own rules, their own loyalties, their own meaning.
When you look through your Instagram, you see a lot of blue rags.
Yeah.
You see a lot of Crip kind of references. Mm-hmm. Is that something you associate with?
Affiliation.
Yeah. Is that something that's always been around? Or?
His answer, when it came, was neither defensive nor evasive. It was something closer to a philosophical statement about belonging, community, and what it means to remain loyal to the place and the people that formed you.
Always been. I mean, I'm born and raised in Brownsville.
And so Brooklyn has always been a Crip.
Yeah, my whole neighborhood, everything is, you know what I'm saying, you know, it's community walk. It's a community walk for me, you know what I'm saying? It's my community. You know what I'm saying? It's my community, it's my people's.
He makes a distinction, one that matters deeply to him, between affiliation born of geography and loyalty and active gang membership defined by violence and criminal enterprise.
I mean, we're not doing no wrong. I mean, I don't gang bang, you know, there's a difference. Yeah. When you're out on the street and y'all out there, y'all putting in work and
actually hurting people. No, we're not doing that. If anything, I'm trying to help empower my people mentally, supportively, and going into a different realm of life.
Whether or not one accepts that distinction, Judah's career speaks to an almost superhuman ability to channel the energy and mentality of those streets into elite athletic performance. 3 New York Golden Gloves titles, professional debut in 1996, 5 world title reigns across 2 divisions, IBF WBO junior welterweight from 2000 to 2004, undisputed welterweight in 2005-2006, culminating in a Hall of Fame induction in 2023. His Super Judah persona, flashy, trash-talking, electric with Brooklyn bravado, was not a performance. It was an authentic expression of exactly where he came from. Zab Judah's story is ultimately about what it means to survive Brownsville and carry it with you, not as a wound, but as an identity. He mentors youth now. He shows up for his community. He never pretended the streets weren't real. He just refused to let them be the only thing he was. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. The name Chavez carries more weight in Mexican boxing than perhaps any other. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. was not just a champion. He was, for an entire generation of Mexican boxing fans, the embodiment of national pride, toughness, and the honor of the sport. His son, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., inherited the name, the bloodline, and a career that took him all the way to the WBC middleweight championship in 2011. But in 2025, the name Chavez was attached to a story so dark and so explosive that it shook not just the boxing world, but law enforcement agencies on 2 sides of the border. Born February 16, 1986, in Culiacan, Sinaloa, a city that has been for decades synonymous with the most powerful drug cartel in the world, Chavez Jr. grew up with a famous father and a complicated geography. Culiacan is the heart of the Sinaloa cartel. Mexico's Attorney General's office alleged in 2025 that Chavez Jr. had been serving as a high-ranking henchman for one of the cartel's most feared figures, Nestor Isidro Perez Salas, known as El Nini, the security chief for Los Chapitos, the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The specific allegations were extraordinary, that Chavez Jr. had used his professional boxing skills not to win championships, but to physically torture cartel members who had made errors, beating them, in the language of intercepted audio allegedly from El Nini himself, like a punching bag. Prosecutors further alleged he had trafficked arms, ammunition, and explosives on behalf of the organization. On July 2, 2025, days after losing a heavily publicized fight against Jake Paul, Chavez Jr. was arrested by ICE in Los Angeles. He was deported to Mexico on August 19th for immigration fraud and cartel-related warrants. He was released on bail on August 24th and currently awaits trial. His father, the legend, the icon, went public with a denial. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. has said that his son was pressured once, but was not truly involved, attributing the situation to his son's addiction struggles, a battle that has been public, painful, and ongoing for years, including multiple rehabilitation stints. The trial will determine what the courts believe. Ronnie Cray. To understand Ronnie Cray, you must first understand the East End of London in the 1940s and 1950s, a world of bombed-out terraces, post-war scarcity, working-class codes of loyalty and violence that operated entirely outside the reach and interest of polite society. In that world, the Cray twins were royalty, but Ronnie, the elder of the two by minutes, the one with the harder face and the more unstable psychology, was something beyond royalty. He was a force of nature, a man whose paranoid schizophrenia and absolute disregard for the consequences of extreme violence made him, in every environment he occupied, the most dangerous person in the room. Born October 24, 1933, in Hoxton, East London, with his twin brother Reginald, Ronnie grew up in a working-class family shaped by a deserter father and an extraordinarily devoted mother named Violet. The twins were fighters from childhood, brawling in the streets of the East End with a coordinated ferocity that, people would later say, appeared almost telepathic. Their outlet was boxing. They trained at the Repton Boxing Club and others across East London, where Ronnie developed into a standout welterweight amateur. He turned professional in 1951, going 4-2 with a knockdown of a loss on points at the Royal Albert Hall, a defeat he took characteristically as a personal insult rather than an athletic result. The boxing career ended when the twins were called up for national service in 1952. They deserted, they were imprisoned, and when they came out, the transition from fighters to gangsters was complete. By the mid-1950s, they had founded The Firm, a sophisticated criminal syndicate that would eventually control East London's entire underworld and extend its reach deep into the glamour of London's West End. Ronnie's role in the firm was equal parts strategist and weapon. His extortion rackets, his arson, his network of violence delivered with a precision that boxing had refined and that paranoid schizophrenia had made genuinely unpredictable. At the peak of their power in the 1960s, the Cray twins ran nightclubs, socialized with celebrities, Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, members of parliament, and operated a criminal empire with the kind of impunity that only comes when you have made absolutely certain that everyone who might stop you is either afraid of you or in your pocket. On March 9, 1966, at the Blind Beggar Pub in Whitechapel, Ronnie Cray walked up to a man named George Cornell, a rival gang member who had reportedly called Ronnie a fat poof in public and shot him once in the head in front of a full bar. Cornell died in hospital. The murder was witnessed by multiple people. None of them testified. The firm had made its point with a clarity that needed no further elaboration. Arrested in 1968, convicted in 1969, certified criminally insane in 1979, transferred to Broadmoor Hospital, where an inmate who encountered him there recalled the walls of his cell lined entirely with photographs of boxers and gangsters. Ronnie Cray died of a heart attack in 1995 at age 61. He was still inside. He died, as he had lived, as the most feared man in the room. Reggie Cray. If Ronnie Cray was the violence, Reggie Cray was the architecture, the organizational mind behind the firm, the man who managed operations, maintained relationships, and kept the machinery of their criminal empire running with something approaching precision while his brother burned the furniture. Where Ronnie was chaos, Reggie was system. Where Ronnie was impulse, Reggie was calculation. And yet, the murder that ultimately sealed their collective fate was Reggie's alone. Reggie was the better boxer of the two. As a professional lightweight, he finished 7-0, unbeaten, a record built on slick skills, clean knockouts, and the kind of composed, intelligent boxing that reflected the man he could have been in a different world. He won the London Junior Championship. There were those who believed, had he committed fully to the sport, he might have gone very far indeed. But boxing, for the Crays, was always a foundation rather than a destination. It gave them their intimidation, their coordination, their physical confidence. What they built on top of it was something the sport could not have anticipated. Inside the firm, Reggie served as the operational counterweight to his brother's volcanic instability. He managed extortion networks with a business person's eye for relationships. He cultivated connections to politicians and entertainers while ensuring that the muscle side of the operation functioned without public exposure. He was, in the words of those who studied them, untouchable, a word his fellow prisoners apparently used with complete sincerity, even decades after his conviction. But in October 1967, fueled by alcohol, pressure from Ronnie, and a rage at being undermined by an associate who had stolen from the firm and failed to deliver on a murder contract, Reggie Cray stabbed Jack the Hat McVitie repeatedly in the face, the neck, and the stomach at a party in Stoke Newington. McVitie had earned his nickname from the hat he wore to cover a bald spot. He did not survive the night. The Scotland Yard investigation that followed, led by Detective Leonard Nipper Red, was one of the most methodical dismantlings of an organized crime operation in British history. Arrested May 1968, convicted March 1969. Life sentence with a 30-year minimum. Reggie Cray spent over 30 years in prison, becoming, as one account described, something of a celebrity within those walls, distributing tobacco, commanding loyalty, still operating in the only way he knew how, even in confinement. He was released on compassionate grounds in August 2000, terminally ill with cancer. He died 2 months later at age 66. The Cray twins were immortalized in 2 films, The Crays in 1990 and Legend in 2015, where Tom Hardy played both brothers simultaneously, and they remain to this day the most famous criminals Britain has ever produced. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.